In the summer of 1992, a forensic DNA profile was created from evidence collected at a crime scene outside Flagstaff, Arizona. It was precise. It was intact. It belonged to the man who had killed Loretta Bodine, a 31-year-old schoolteacher, on a Tuesday evening in June. And for 32 years, it matched nothing. Not because the science was wrong, not because the evidence was flawed, but because the man who left that profile had never been arrested, never been booked, never had his DNA entered into any system that existed at the time. He was a ghost, not in any supernatural sense, but in the most mundane and infuriating sense possible. A man living an ordinary life in an ordinary house, entirely invisible to every database built to find him. That is not a story about a case that was too hard to solve. That is a story about a killer who survived on the edge of what the science of his era could reach, and who spent 32 years betting that the edge would never move. He lost that bet in 2024. It would take a retired lab analyst who kept a personal list of her 30 longest-running open profiles, a genealogy database built by people trying to find their great-grandparents, and a single investigator willing to follow a family tree backward through 4 generations to find one name at the bottom of it. But before any of that, we have to go back to Flagstaff. Because to understand what 32 years of a cold case costs, you first have to understand who Loretta was. Flagstaff in the early 1990s sat at 7,000 feet above sea level in the high Arizona desert, ringed by ponderosa pines and the dark cone of the San Francisco peaks, and operated on a social rhythm entirely distinct from the Phoenix sprawl 4 hours south. It was a university town. Northern Arizona University anchored the east side, but it was also a working town, a Route 66 town, a place where long-haul truckers stopped at the same diners as Forestry Service rangers, and where the summers were cool enough that people actually sat on their front porches in the evening, which in Arizona in June felt like a gift. Loretta Bodine had moved to Flagstaff in 1988 from Albuquerque, following a teaching position at Sunnyside Elementary School on the west side of the city. She taught 4th grade. She had been doing it for 4 years and had developed, according to her principal, the particular skill that the best elementary teachers have: the ability to make a child feel genuinely seen inside a classroom of 28. Her students called her Mrs. B. She kept a jar of colored pencils on every desk cluster. She let children who were struggling stay in at lunch and never made it feel like a punishment. She had an apartment on North Agassiz Street, 3 blocks from campus. She drove a white 1989 Subaru wagon she had named Delbert for reasons she never fully explained to anyone. She called her mother, Patricia, in Albuquerque every Sunday morning. She hiked the Kachina Trail on weekends when she wasn't lesson planning. Always the same trail, always alone, because she said the ponderosas on the north slope were the most honest thing she knew of in the world. She had a close group of colleagues at Sunnyside, 3 other teachers she ate lunch with every day, women who described her as sharp and funny and incapable of small talk in the way that some people are genuinely constitutionally unable to be boring. She had a relationship that had ended the previous year, quietly and without rancor, and she had been, by everyone's account, doing well. She had applied for a graduate program in curriculum development at Now. She was thinking about the next thing. On the evening of Tuesday, June 9, 1992, Loretta left Sunnyside Elementary at 4:30 p.m., stopped at a Bosch's grocery store on South Milton Road, and was seen at the checkout by a cashier at approximately 5:10 p.m. She was buying pasta and a bottle of Snapple iced tea, and what the cashier remembered as a lot of cilantro. She was wearing a yellow cardigan. She was smiling at something on the cover of a magazine in the rack beside the register. She was never seen alive again. At 5:42 p.m., Loretta's white Subaru was recorded on a traffic camera at the intersection of Milton Road and Route 66, heading north toward her apartment. It was the last documented image of her vehicle in motion. At 7:15 p.m., her colleague and closest friend at the school, a woman named Gwen Marsh, called Loretta's apartment to finalize plans for a Saturday hike. No answer. She assumed Loretta was in the shower or had stepped out. At 9:30 p.m., Gwen called again. No answer. At 6:45 a.m. on Wednesday, June 10th, a Coconino County road maintenance worker named Dale Arpke was clearing debris on a stretch of Forest Highway 151, 6 miles northeast of Flagstaff, when he found Loretta Bodine's Subaru pulled onto a narrow gravel turnout off the road's shoulder. The driver's door was open. The engine was off. The grocery bags were still in the back seat. The pasta and the cilantro and the bottle of Snapple sitting in the early morning mountain light like a still life arranged by someone who had stepped away for just a moment. She was found 112 feet from the car. The Coconino County Sheriff's Office and Flagstaff Police responded jointly. Detectives determined that Loretta had been attacked in close proximity to the vehicle. The evidence suggested the Subaru had been forced or guided to the pullout rather than stopping willingly. There were tire marks consistent with a second vehicle alongside hers on the gravel. No witnesses. The nearest residence was 3.5 miles away. There was no payphone, no business, no reason for anyone to be on Forest Highway 151 on a Tuesday evening, unless they lived on it or were looking for someone who didn't know they were being followed. The medical examiner confirmed Loretta had been killed between approximately 5:45 and 7 p.m. On June 9th, the time window between the traffic camera and the first of Gwen Marsh's unanswered calls was 45 minutes. 45 minutes in which something had happened on a stretch of mountain highway that held its secret absolutely. The Coconino County forensic team processed the scene over 2 days. What they recovered was significant. A DNA profile, developed from biological material collected at the scene, that was male, complete, and preserved by the high-altitude cold of the June night. The profile was logged, entered into the state system, and run against the FBI's CODIS database of convicted offender DNA. No match. The profile was run again 6 months later, then again in 1994, when new profiles had been added to the database. No match. No match. Detectives also recovered a partial boot impression in the gravel near the tree line, a size 11. A dark thread caught on a low juniper branch. And one thing that the lead investigator, Detective Ramon Ibarra, noted in his scene report, with the careful instinct of someone who had learned to log everything, a faint impression in the gravel, consistent with a vehicle that had idled there, in that pullout, for longer than a few minutes. Whoever had been waiting there had been patient. He had known, or guessed, that this road, at that hour, would give him exactly what he needed. Detective Ramon Ibarra was 35 years old in the summer of 1992, 7 years into his career with the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, and possessed of the particular quality that separates detectives who close cases from detectives who merely work them. He was willing to be wrong. He had a theory by the end of the first week. He held it loosely, because the evidence kept refusing to confirm it. The theory was a man named Dale Cottrell. Cottrell was 41, a long-haul trucker who ran a regular route through Flagstaff on Interstate 40 and had a prior arrest, not a conviction, for the harassment of a woman at a truck stop in New Mexico in 1989. He matched the general physical profile suggested by the boot impression. He had been in Flagstaff on the day of Loretta's death. His logbook confirmed a fuel stop at a Flying J on Butler Avenue at 3:15 p.m. less than 2 miles from Sunnyside Elementary. Ibarra interviewed Cottrell 3 times between July and October 1992. Cottrell was cooperative, consistent, and irritable in the specific way that innocent people become irritable when they understand that being in the wrong place at the wrong time has made them a subject of investigation. He agreed to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. The sample did not match the profile from the scene. Cottrell was cleared in November 1992. Ibarra's theory, held loosely, released cleanly. The investigation then entered its longest and most frustrating phase, the systematic elimination of every other identified possibility. Loretta's ex-partner was interviewed and cleared. A now student with a history of following female faculty members was interviewed and cleared. An itinerant laborer who had worked a forestry contract in the Flagstaff area that spring gave a DNA sample in 1993 and was cleared. Every door opened and then closed. The DNA profile remained the most complete piece of evidence in the file. A full, intact genetic signature of the man who had killed Loretta Bodine. And it remained, run against CODIS and the Arizona State Database with every new update. A ghost. Every year, the databases grew. Every year, the profile matched nothing. The institutional failure in this case was not negligence. Ibarra worked it steadily for 4 years before his caseload overwhelmed the capacity to give it primary attention. The evidence was preserved correctly. The profile was run regularly. The failure was simpler and more frustrating than human error. It was timing. The man who killed Loretta Bodine had simply never been arrested for anything, anywhere, that required his DNA to be collected. In a different decade, that would have been the end of the story. Patricia Bodine, Loretta's mother, drove from Albuquerque to Flagstaff every June 9th for 20 years. She would park near the school, walk the neighborhood, sit in the car for a while. She told a reporter in 2008 that she kept coming because she wanted Loretta to know that somebody was still looking. Whether that made any practical sense or not, she said she knew it didn't. She couldn't stop coming. Ramon Ibarra made detective sergeant in 2001. He retired in 2012. On his last day, he updated the Bodine file with a single entry, profile intact. No match as of this date. Case remains active. He had run the profile against CODIS 27 times. By 2000, 8 years had gone by. Flagstaff had grown. The stretch of Forest Highway 151, where Loretta was found, had been regraded and widened as part of a county road improvement project. The gravel pullout was gone, absorbed into a widened shoulder. There was nothing there now to mark it. Sunnyside Elementary had cycled through 3 principals since 1992. Some of the students who had been in Loretta's 4th grade class in her final year of teaching were in their 20s now. One of them, a woman named Rosa Medina, who had been 8 years old in Loretta's classroom, spoke about her at a victim's remembrance event in Flagstaff in 2015. She said, "She let me stay in at lunch when things were hard at home, and she never once made me feel like a problem. I've thought about her almost every year since I found out what happened to her. I wanted her to know that she mattered, that what she did mattered." Patricia Bodine continued driving up from Albuquerque each June. She was in her 70s by 2010 and making the drive alone since Loretta's father had passed in 2007. She had a photograph of Loretta in the yellow cardigan, taken at a school picnic the spring before she died, on the dashboard of her car. She said she kept it there so that Loretta could see where they were going. The DNA profile sat in the Coconino County evidence system. It was run against CODIS updates in 2004, 2007, 2010, 2013, no match, no match, no match, no match. A forensic analyst named Carla Whitfield had worked the Flagstaff Regional Lab since 1998. She had inherited what she called her personal list, a handwritten index of the open profiles she checked first every time a new database update came through. The ones she'd been waiting on longest. The Bodine profile was number 4 on the list by 2005. By 2015, it had moved to number 1. In 2019, Congress passed legislation expanding the legal framework under which law enforcement agencies could submit profiles to consumer genealogy databases. In 2020, Coconino County joined a consortium of Arizona agencies piloting the use of forensic genetic genealogy for cold cases with biological evidence. The Bodine profile was submitted for genealogy analysis in March 2021. Carla Whitfield crossed it off her list. Then she wrote it back down, with a note beside it. In process. Every case on this channel is built from weeks of research into real lives that deserved more than they got. If you want us to keep uncovering these stories, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to Loretta. The results came back 14 months later. In May 2022, the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification returned a genealogy report to the Coconino County Cold Case Unit. The report identified, with high confidence, a cluster of NA relatives in the GED-match database who shared enough genetic material with the Bodine crime scene profile to indicate a second to third cousin relationship at the closest. The investigator who received it was a detective named Sandra Mao, 41 years old, who had been assigned to the cold case unit 18 months earlier and had been warned by her supervisor that the Bodine case was the one that had broken 2 previous investigators' patience. Mao understood immediately what the genealogy report was and was not. It was not an answer. It was a family tree with an unknown person somewhere inside it. She sat down and started building. Forensic genetic genealogy works this way. The crime scene DNA is uploaded to a public ancestry database. The same platforms where ordinary people search for distant relatives and trace immigration records and discover that their grandfather was not, in fact, from where he claimed. The database finds individuals whose DNA overlaps with the crime scene profile, indicating shared ancestors. From those shared ancestors, a genealogist builds downward through public records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, census records, obituaries, mapping every branch of the family tree until the branches narrow to a pool of candidates who could plausibly be the unknown contributor. Then, investigators use traditional methods, surveillance, a discarded DNA sample, a voluntary swab, to confirm or eliminate. It is painstaking work. It can take months. And it requires a genealogist who can hold an enormous branching structure in their mind while simultaneously looking for the one person at the end of a branch who is male, who was alive in 1992, who lived in or passed through northern Arizona that June. Mao worked with a forensic genealogist contracted through the state for 11 weeks. The family tree they built spanned 4 generations, 2 states, and eventually narrowed to a pool of 7 male candidates in the right age range. 6 were eliminated by cross-referencing location, age, and physical profile. 1 remained. His name was Gerald Stokes. He was 63 years old. He lived in Prescott, Arizona, 90 miles south of Flagstaff. In 1992, he had been 33, working as a long-distance freight hauler on a route that regularly took him through Flagstaff on Interstate 40. He had no criminal record, no prior arrests. He had been, for 32 years, entirely invisible to every system that had been looking for the man who killed Loretta Bodine. In August 2022, Detective Mao arranged for a surveillance team to collect a discarded Dina sample from a coffee cup Stokes left in a gas station trash bin in Prescott. She sent it to the lab. She did not call anyone until the result came back. She had learned on this case not to speak things she wasn't certain of yet. The result came back on a Thursday morning in September 2022. It was a full match to the Bodine crime scene profile. 30 years, 2 months, and 14 days after Loretta was killed on Forest Highway 151, the ghost had a name. Gerald Stokes had lived in Prescott for 22 years by the time Sandra Mao knocked on his door. He owned a modest ranch-style house at the end of a cul-de-sac. He had retired from trucking in 2017 and spent his time, according to neighbors, working on a used boat he kept in the driveway, watching sports on a television visible from the street, and keeping largely to himself. He had never married. He had no children that anyone knew of. He was described, consistently, as the kind of neighbor whose name you knew and whose business you didn't. He had also, investigators established in the weeks after the Dina match, passed through Flagstaff on the afternoon of June 9, 1992. His trucking logbook from that period, obtained through his former employer's retained records, showed a fuel stop in Flagstaff at 2:50 p.m., placing him in the city at the same time Loretta Bodine was finishing her school day at Sunnyside Elementary. The stretch of Forest Highway 151 where she was found was directly adjacent to a back route truckers, occasionally used to bypass the Route 66 interchange. Investigators could not establish with certainty how Stokes had come to be on that road that evening. What they could establish was that he had been there, that his DNA said so, and that 32 years of a complete and intact evidence profile had waited for the technology to say his name. On October 4, 2022, Detective Mao and 2 Coconino County Sheriff's deputies approached the ranch house on the cul-de-sac in Prescott at 9:15 in the morning. Stokes was in the driveway, working on the boat. He was wearing jeans and an old work shirt, and he looked up when the cars pulled in with the particular expression of a man who has spent 3 decades waiting for a specific thing to happen and has never quite been able to stop expecting it. He did not run. He did not speak. He looked at Mao for a long moment, and then he looked at the ground. He was placed under arrest for the first-degree murder of Loretta Bodine. In the weeks that followed, investigators worked to reconstruct what had happened on the evening of June 9, 1992. Stokes, on advice of counsel, declined to make a statement. He offered no explanation, no confession, no expression of remorse in any venue where it was recorded. The case against him was built entirely from the DNA match, the logbook, and the forensic reconstruction of the crime scene. He was tried in Coconino County Superior Court in the spring of 2024. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on the first-degree murder charge. When the verdict was read, Patricia Bodine, who was 81 years old and had driven up from Albuquerque the week before the trial, sat with her hands folded in her lap and closed her eyes for a long moment. Her granddaughter, Loretta's niece, was sitting beside her and reached over and took her hand. Patricia did not cry. She had, she said later, run out of the kind of tears that come from waiting. What she felt was something she described as simpler than peace and older than relief. She said, "I told her I'd keep coming. I kept coming." Gerald Stokes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is 65 years old. He will die there. He never explained the coffee cup. There is a photograph of Loretta Bodine taken at a Sunnyside Elementary School picnic in the spring of 1992, 3 months before she died. She is standing in a schoolyard in her yellow cardigan, laughing at something a colleague just said, one hand raised as if she is about to make a point. She looks like someone in the middle of a sentence that she fully intends to finish. She is 31 years old. She has no idea that the school year she is finishing will be the last one. That is the photograph Patricia Bodine kept on the dashboard of her car for 30 years. Rosa Medina, the former student who had spoken at the 2015 remembrance, who had been 8 years old in Loretta's classroom, attended the sentencing hearing in 2024. She was now 40 years old. She sat in the gallery and afterwards said only that she hoped Loretta knew her students remembered her, that the colored pencils on the desk clusters had mattered, that the lunches spent quietly in a warm classroom when things were hard at home had mattered, that the particular skill of making a child feel seen, that skill, which Loretta had spent 4 years building and never got to finish building, had not been erased. It had been carried forward, in 30 years of small ways, by every child who had sat in her class. Loretta Bodine wanted to understand how children learn and spend her life helping them do it better. She had colored pencils and a Subaru named Delbert and a trail she hiked every weekend because she said the Ponderosas were honest. She called her mother every Sunday. She was thinking about the next thing. She deserved the next thing. She deserved all of the next things, every ordinary and specific one of them, for the rest of a long life. What this case offers us, as hard as it is to sit with, is a version of hope that has a strange shape to it. The technology that identified Gerald Stokes did not exist in 1992. It barely existed in 2010. The databases that made forensic genetic genealogy possible were built by ordinary people uploading their own DNA to find their family histories, with no knowledge that they were also, incidentally, building the infrastructure that would one day solve crimes their relatives had committed. There is something in that worth thinking about, a justice system quietly extended by millions of private acts of curiosity. How many other profiles are sitting in evidence lockers right now, waiting for databases to grow large enough to find their match? And what does it mean for justice, and for the families waiting for it? That the answer to a 32-year question was always present in the evidence, always readable, always just out of reach of what the science of its time could do. And what do you think it cost Gerald Stokes to live 32 years knowing exactly what was sitting in that county evidence locker, waiting for the world to catch up? Justice came for Loretta Bodine after 32 years. Her mother drove to Flagstaff every June and kept coming until it did. If stories like hers are why you're here, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.